Hope everyone's having a pleasant afternoon. It's the 30th of July. It's a beautiful, beautiful day. We're really enjoying this summer, although it's going by way too fast. We're driving down from northern Michigan, which is really the northern part of the lower peninsula, or the southern part of Michigan. Went to a wedding up in a place called Petoskey. And then flew out of Traverse City to take care of some business in New York, Denver, Dallas, Pennsylvania, and then flew back into Traverse City last night, picked up the car, and we're headed down to southeast Michigan to get some work done for the next couple days. And we have had this car now, the 2020 Tesla Model S Long Range Plus, which we bought in the summer of 23 when it was 3 years old. So we've had it for just over a year, and we have put just over 40,000 miles on it. It had about 40,000 when we got it, and it's now at just over 80. So we have doubled the miles on it, and again, put about 40,000 in just over 12 months. 13, 14 months. I'm sorry, 12, 13 months. And that's the most miles we've ever put on a car in that short amount of time. We actually put 9,000 on it in the first month that we had it. We bought it on the 30th of June last year, and between 30th of June and the 31st of July, we literally put almost 10,000 miles on it. In a word, over the course of a year, it has been a fantastic car. In 2 words, it's been almost perfect. We have had a couple of quibbles and a couple little issues with it here and there, minor ones. But it is as close to perfect as any car that we've ever owned. And we say that having owned lots and lots and lots of cars. We have a Dodge 3500 with the Cummins, the 5.9 Cummins. Fantastic truck. We've got a Silverado 3500 with the 6.6 Duramax. A good truck, a very good truck. We've got the 23 Super Duty with the 6.7 Power Stroke. Fantastic truck. We've had 3 F-150s. We had a 97 4.6 with the 5-speed. We had a 21 Power Boost, and we still have a 21 Power Stroke with the 3.0 diesel. Great truck. Amazing truck. We've had a Suburban. We've had an Expedition. We've had Honda Pilots. We have a Honda Odyssey. We've had 2 of those. The Lexus version, the kind of like the Highlander, the Lexus RX 330. We had one of those. We've had a Dodge Charger with the Hemi, all-wheel drive. We've had a Honda Accord. We've had a ton of cars. We've had the Passat with the 2.8 V6 gasoline. And the manual transmission, fantastic car. Kept that one for 20 years. And then we've had 2 of the newer Passats with the TDI diesel engines. Tremendous cars, extraordinary cars. But in all that time, nothing has been as close to perfect as this 2020 Tesla Model S Long Range Plus. And we're saying that knowing that a lot of people don't really have any interest in ever owning an electric car or ever owning a Tesla. In particular. And we're not saying it because of the fact that it's electric. Okay, that's incidental to why we like it so much. A lot of people think an electric car, well, they dislike them because, well, they think they're being forced to buy one. And yes, it's true. A lot of governments, are state and national governments, are trying to outlaw gas and diesel powered cars, which is a really, really stupid idea. And so if you think the government's coming to take away your gas and diesel powered car, and you don't appreciate that fact, well, rightfully so. And if you also are resistant to owning an EV because, well, you think the infrastructure isn't there and you're not going to be able to charge it, and you might be stranded somewhere with no juice. Well, that's definitely the case if you own certain ones, but not if you own a Tesla. Since the first time we bought a Tesla 5 years ago, we have never had a situation anywhere we took it where we thought, oh my God, we might be stranded because we might run out of juice and not be able to charge this thing. The Tesla, even 5 years ago, a half decade ago, had a good enough network, charging network, distributed all across the nation into very, very remote areas, to the point where we never had to worry that we were not going to be able to charge it. Okay, so that's not an issue. Again, as long as you're talking about a Tesla. If you're talking about something like a F-150 Lightning, if you're talking about, one of these GM electric cars, yeah, that's a very legitimate concern. And there's horror stories. There was a guy that took a Lightning on a road trip, like last winter, and he got such bad range, and it was so hard to find places to plug in that he gave up and turned it in at a dealer and bought or maybe rented a car or truck with a gas engine, because he just couldn't finish that trip in the stupid F-150 Lightning, which is a heavily compromised truck, and which is really not useful for anybody who owns a truck and wants to use it the way a truck is meant to be used. But again, the charging infrastructure is just not an issue, and it hasn't been an issue since at least 5 years ago if you own a Tesla. We took our last Tesla across the country, 2,000 miles from Michigan to Vegas. Never had a problem finding a place to charge it. So we've taken this one all over the country, like all over the country. Never had a problem. And then I guess some people are resistant to owning an EV because, well, they like the way they like the way it feels and sounds to drive a car or truck with a real engine. And we will not try to tell you that's not the case. If you own a Dodge with a Hemi, if you own a Ford with a Coyote V8, if you own a GM with that LS V8, no, an EV is never going to sound and feel the way something like that feels. If you own a Cummins diesel, there's nothing like a Cummins. A Duramax, you could take it or leave it, and a Power Stroke, yeah, that's nice too. But a Cummins, I mean, you fall in love with that kind of thing, and it becomes a part of your family. You have like a special relationship with your truck if you own a Cummins, for God's sakes. But at the same time, this Tesla, we find ourselves not missing a real engine when we drive it. It's got something around 600 horsepower. It'll do about an 11-second quarter mile. It is faster than anything we've ever driven, and probably faster than anything that most people have ever driven, and accelerates faster. I mean, it'll do sub 3 seconds, 0 to 60. And you're not going to hear the engine roaring, and you're not going to hear that transmission shifting, and you're not going to get the chance to shift gears yourself like you would in a manual. But again, you just find yourself not missing it because of how fast it is, and because of how good a car it is in really every other way. So I'm just going to throw that out there, and you can take it or leave it, and a lot of people will refuse to believe it, and I'm not going to try to convince you otherwise. But just saying, as somebody who grew up with cars, and someone who has loved cars to death for going on 50 years, this is the kind of EV you can live with and not mind the fact that it doesn't have an engine. I'm just going to put it like that. With two exceptions, and the first exception being, if you're somebody who has to do a lot of towing, this is not the car for you. And an EV pickup is not the vehicle for you either. Because an EV pickup, whether it's an F-150 Lightning, whether it's that ugly looking Tesla Cybertruck, whether it's the Silverado EV, which has an enormous battery, like 200 plus kilowatt hour battery, there is no EV pickup truck or SUV that will work when you do extended range towing. it just doesn't work. They're going to lose half their range or more, and then you're going to have to find a place to plug in and charge, and most likely you're going to have to unhitch your trailer, and you're going to spend almost as much time charging as you do driving. And so an EV pickup or SUV or sedan is practically useless if you do towing on a regular basis. And then the second thing I'll say is that an EV is not going to work for you if you cannot plug it in to 240 AC, either at home or at work. If all you have is 120 AC, then it's going to be a useless vehicle for you. And we know this, having owned a Tesla previous to this one for about 2.5 years. Well, just around 2 years, and having had just 120 at home and 120 at work. It's basically a useless vehicle because it takes forever to charge. It gives you like maybe a mile or two of range for every hour you have it plugged in, and you will never be able to keep it plugged in long enough to charge it and still be able to use it. So those are the two caveats I'm going to throw out there. But for everybody else, there is no practical reason not to have an EV. And I guess I'll throw one more out there, and this is a case of a person who does so much road tripping that they are plugging in mostly at the Tesla superchargers. If you get most of your juice from a Tesla supercharger because you're never in a place or a place where you have to pay to plug in, even a level 2, meaning a 240, and you're never in a place where you get free charging on a consistent basis, then it's more economical actually to own something like a diesel-powered car, something like a VW TDI, or just a car that gets really good gas mileage. If you care about the actual cost of ownership on a per mile basis, when you're charging your Tesla at like a paid charging station, either a Tesla supercharger or like one of these ChargePoint or one of these other paid charging things, you go from owning a vehicle that's about equivalent of about 100 mile per gallon car in terms of the cost to something that's around a 30 mile per gallon car in terms of cost per mile. And so just keep that in mind. So again, for an EV to work for you, you have to be the kind of person who doesn't need to use it for towing. Maybe you have a different vehicle to tow with. And you have to be the kind of person who can plug into 240 AC, otherwise known as level 2 charging, at home or at work, for the majority of the charging that you do. And for anybody else, no, it's not going to work. So I'll just throw that out there. And yes, if you live in cold weather, you will get less range than you will if you live in a warm climate. If you live, like, let's just say north of Interstate 70, if you can picture that, like Colorado, Kansas, Missouri, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, that kind of area. If you're near or north of Interstate 70, you're going to lose a lot of range in the cold, and it's going to take you longer to charge in the cold. But it's not the end of the world. Again, as long as you can plug in at night to 240 at home, or you can plug in during the daytime to 240 at work, and your car can survive the trip back home and back to work in time to plug in and not lose the entire battery. And so the cold weather, a lot of people say it's going to kill you. No, it isn't. We've driven this thing in like sub-zero temperatures. Not a big deal. Again, you go a little bit less of a distance between charging stops, and it takes you a little bit longer to charge, but it's just not a big deal. Now, last winter, they had this situation in like Chicago and Detroit where there were tons and tons of Teslas piled up waiting to charge at the supercharging stations, and some of them died while they were waiting. And some of the chargers went out of service because like the plugs got all iced up and so on and so forth. And that was the case where that was a case of two things. In large part, it was a situation where city dwellers who did all their charging at Tesla superchargers, overloaded them. And it was also a case of Uber drivers who did all their charging at Tesla superchargers. Now, again, if you are able to plug into 240 AC at home or at work, that's not a problem for you. And if you happen to be on a road trip, I guess I'd say be careful when you're near Chicago or near Detroit in the dead of winter and it's snowing and it's sub-zero. You're going to have longer waiting times, and you might have this situation that turns into a crisis. When you go to plug in and charge your car. So just keep that in mind in terms of a caveat. Okay, so with that said, let's get to our review. The 4 reasons why this is the best car we've ever owned. Number 1, because it drives itself. If you're the kind of person who, like us, puts on 40,000 miles in the course of a year, you need a car that drives itself. And you need a car that drives itself really well. Now, we've had Fords, like the F-150, the new Super Duty. They have a pretty rudimentary, pretty primitive self-driving system. And in the F-150, it was called, and the Super Duty, it's called like Copilot 360 2.0 Assist. That is a good system. If you have a Ford that has Blue Cruise, that's good as well. Not a lot better. The Tesla is 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 times better. Even the Tesla that we owned, that was a 2016, so it's now 8 years old in terms of technology, and it had that early version of autopilot. Even an 8-year-old Tesla with autopilot is better than a brand new Ford with Blue Cruise or 360 Copilot. Better than a GM with Super Cruise. Better than any of these other ones, and we've driven them. We've driven the Honda with its little lane keeping and lane centering system. We've driven a lot of them. None of them are anywhere near as good as a Tesla in terms of how well they keep you in your lane and how well they maintain your distance from traffic that's ahead of you. Again, put tens of thousands of miles on these vehicles. Put a combined 100,000 plus on the F-150s and the Super Duty, and there's just no comparison. They're good, but the Tesla is a whole nother level. And we've got the full self-driving, or the FSD system, activated on this one. You honestly don't need it. Just the basic autopilot's good enough. The basic autopilot that comes with every Tesla for free. And so that's the first reason why this is the best car or truck of any kind we've ever owned. It drives itself. And when you're going 900 plus miles a day, you need a car that's going to do the majority of the driving. Now, you're still going to keep your hand on the wheel at all times. And you're not going to like go to sleep and take a nap or open your laptop and start doing your taxes or what have you. No, you still got to watch the road, and you still got to have your hand on the wheel in case it screws up, because hopefully nobody out there is stupid enough to trust their life and their family's life to their car and to the decisions their car makes about, where to go and what to do. Like, don't be stupid. But the fact that the car is going to do the vast majority of the driving, and all you got to do is just hold the wheel and be ready to take over in case it does something stupid. That cuts your mental workload, and that cuts your fatigue level, and that improves your alertness level by 95 or 100% or more. Okay, reason number 2. It's fast as hell. And you might say, why does that matter? Well, it matters if you're on a 2-lane highway, as we are, and you got slow-moving traffic that you have to get around. You do not want to be driving a vehicle that takes forever to pass somebody else. because that becomes a safety issue. This car has 600 plus horsepower. It's not the fastest Tesla they make. The fastest one is called the Plaid, but you really don't need anything faster than this. It's got 600 horsepower. It's got all-wheel drive, so it puts the power down very, very well. You know, you're not doing burnouts and fishtailing, and it's not trying to put you off the road into a ditch like a Mustang or something. It'll do an 11-second quarter mile. It'll do, I don't know, sub 3 second 0 to 60. It's faster than you're ever going to need. Not that you need to be drag racing people, but yeah, when you're on a 2-lane highway and you need to get around traffic as quickly as possible, that turns into a safety issue. When you're merging onto an interstate, that turns into a safety issue. You don't want to have a car that's going to leave you waiting when you put the gas pedal down. Okay, so number 1, it drives itself. Number 2, it's fast as hell. Number 3, it's safe as hell. And part of that is the power, and obviously the handling and the braking and all that. And part of it, and so it's going to avoid an accident in the first place. But the other part is that if you do get into an accident, it is going to do a better job of keeping you alive and the other passengers alive than any other vehicle out there. The 4 safest vehicles on the planet right now in terms of accidents or fatalities per million miles driven: Tesla Model S, Model X, Model 3, and Model Y, with autopilot engaged. The next 4 safest cars on the planet in terms of accidents or fatalities per million miles driven: Tesla Model X, Model S, Model X, Model 3, and Model Y, with autopilot disengaged. And so if you put a lot of miles on your car or truck, you have to be in the absolute safest car or truck that you possibly can. And you need to spare no expense to get into the safest car or truck that you possibly can. Because everybody at some point in their life is going to have an accident, statistically speaking, and you don't want to cheap it out. You don't want to be cheaping out on safety, knowing that you will be in a major accident at some point in your life, statistically speaking. It's just not worth it. So that's number 3. And then number 4, it's got an enormous amount of room, and it's a very, very comfortable car for taking long trips. It's got an absolutely enormous amount of room. You know, being an EV, it doesn't have a drivetrain tunnel, and so you got no drive shaft or transmission taking up space, and you got a completely flat floor, and so the amount of stuff you can put in the back is extraordinary. If you go to Costco and you use one of those flatbeds, you could put a flatbed that is piled 5 feet high with groceries into the back of your Tesla, meaning into the cargo area, and and somewhat into the back seat. It's got an enormous amount. It's got as much room as something like a Tahoe or an Expedition, standard wheelbase. And then it's got a good amount of room for passengers. Not a huge amount of room, but you can fit 5 people in this thing, 6-footers, and they'll be okay. You're not going to take a basketball team somewhere like you would in an Expedition or a Suburban, but you could take a family of 5 anywhere you need to go for as long as you need to go, as far as you need to go, I should say, in comfort. Now, the 3 people in the back seat, hopefully they're friends and they're on good terms with each other. But the 2 people in the front, no issues whatsoever. It is enormously comfortable, and you have tons and tons of room. I will say, you don't have quite the amount of like cubbies and pockets. Like the doors don't have any storage at all. And cup holders, if you need like 19 cup holders, you're not gonna get that in a Tesla. It doesn't have any storage on the dashboard like some of your pickups do. And our first Honda Accord, you know, it had like a tray right there. And the console kind of fills up pretty quickly with junk, and you run out of space there. So in that respect, yeah, it's not perfect. Like our F-150 and the Super Duty have gigantic amounts of storage, and this thing doesn't have quite as much, like in terms of useful pockets and cubbies and, you know, nooks and crannies to store stuff. But that's all right. And so those, again, for those 4 reasons, there is nothing we've ever driven and nothing we can imagine out there that's a better vehicle. And you know, the short version of this review, if you want to stop it right now, there is no better car on the planet if you care about driving long distances over the course of months and years, and having a car that drives itself, having a car that's fast as hell, having a car that is safe as hell, and has tons and tons of room and a very, very comfortable cockpit or cabin. So end of discussion. I'll throw a few more things out there. If you're looking at a Tesla, if you're looking at an EV, the only one you should look at is a Tesla, at least for now. There's nothing else that's comparable in terms of safety, in terms of range, in terms of self-driving. There really just isn't. Which one should you get? And the answer, if you can afford it, is this one here, the Model S. And the prices for these, both new and used, are coming way, way down. You can get one that's 5 or 6 years old for, you know, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, depending on the miles it has on it. This thing had 40,000 when we got it, and it was 3 years old, and we got it for, I think, under 50K. They're about 75 or 80 when they're brand new. And they used to come with free supercharging, meaning free juice for life at the Tesla chargers, and they don't anymore. We had the chance actually to get a 20 when it was brand new with free supercharging for life, and we passed on it because the payment was going to be a little steep. Looking back at it, that would have been the time to get one. Summer of 2020, when the Long Range Plus first came out, we had the offer from Tesla to trade in our 2016 for a brand new 20, free supercharging for life. That would have been the car to get, but again, at the time, it just felt a little bit egregious. But no, again, with the amount of miles we put on it, the free supercharging would have been nice. It's not essential, and it's not indispensable. It's not the end of the world. But why the Model S? Because out of the 4 Teslas you can get, we're not really counting the Cybertruck as a serious option. It's got the best combination of long range, fast charging, a big battery, and storage room. It's got 402 miles EPA range. This one did, the 2020. The newer ones, I think, have like 405, so they haven't really improved virtually at all. They're maybe like 1% better. If they came out with a Tesla that had 450 or 500 miles of range, we would absolutely consider it. But 400 is all we need. And when you talk about a 400 mile EPA range, that is in reality, in terms of practical range, that's about 250 miles. Because you're not going to get the EPA range unless you're going like 40 miles an hour. It's just not happening. So like when we leave out on a trip, for instance, we will charge it to 90 or 95%, get on the road, and that so-called 400 miles of EPA range is really 350 or so when we start, according to the little range-o-meter right down there. And then we'll get about 250 miles down the road, typically. Call it 4 hours, and then make our first stop. So again, just think about it this way: a so-called 402 miles of range, when you charge it to 95%, give or take, it's going to be at about 350, 360, and it's going to get you about 250 miles down the road. and then, or about 4 hours down the road, and then you're going to stop for about 15 minutes, and then go for another 2 hours or 150 miles, and then you're going to stop for another 15 minutes and go about 2 hours or 150 miles, and that's about the way it goes when you're on a long trip. And you could do that all day, because let's be realistic, you're stopping for biological reasons every 2 hours to begin with. You're usually stopping before the car needs to, because you need to stop, at least if you're middle-aged. And so by the time you stop, get the car plugged in, go inside, take care of business, and then come back out, the car is usually ready to go. So you're not sitting there for like a half an hour, busting out your laptop and, writing your next novel, waiting for this car to charge. It's just not the case. Anything made after about 2018 is going to charge fast enough that it's just not an issue on trips. And if we're being realistic, the typical gasoline or diesel powered car is stopping every 3 or 4 hours anyway. So in that first leg of the day, the first 250, 300 miles, it's the same as a gas or a diesel car. And so when people say, oh, you could never do a long road trip in this thing, we have gone 900 plus miles in a day in this thing. We went 1,000 miles in a day in our previous one. And again, in a modern Tesla made after about 2017-18, it's going to charge so fast that you are not going to be sitting there waiting on the car. You're going to find the charging stop on the map, and it does a very good job of finding stops for you, and plug in, go inside, do your business, get back out to the car, and you're back on your way. And so again, the fact that this thing had 400 miles of range, the next closest one is I feel like the Long Range Plus Model X had 373 or so, give or take. That's close, but the problem with that one is that it's not as aerodynamic. It's got a much taller profile, and so it's going to use its range faster, and it's going to take a little bit longer to charge. Not like this thing. Even though it's got the same battery, it's going to take a little bit longer to get miles back into it in terms of charging speed. And so it's less efficient. This thing, in terms of efficiency, it gets about 3.5 or 4 miles per kilowatt hour of juice, otherwise known as around 250 to call it 275 in terms of watt hours per mile, which is basically the same thing. It's just two different ways of saying the same thing. And the other reason we didn't want the X is that it's got those Falcon wing doors, and those things are going to be a maintenance nightmare. Those things are going to be impossible to maintain, and it will cost you a fortune. Those super complex Falcon wing doors. And being as how we keep our cars for years and decades at a time, we don't need something that's going to be breaking all the time. We appreciate the simplicity of like a normal car door, not this stupid Falcon wing door. And so that's why we prefer the S over the X. The Model 3 and the Model Y, they're both very efficient, but there's a couple of problems with them. The first is that they are made out of steel, not aluminum, and steel is obviously going to rust over time. The Model S is made out of aluminum and is never going to rust. And when you live in the Rust Belt, that makes a big deal. You don't want your car like disintegrating and falling apart after 5 or 6 or 10 or 20 years. Our Expedition, our 2004 Expedition, that thing rotted so badly that like when the radiator died, the mechanic had to like cut out massive amounts of steel from the front of it rusted steel and like rivet and spot weld like an entire new radiator support into it because of how bad it was rusted. You know, the body is starting to crumble. You know, those rockers and those fenders, absolutely starting to disintegrate. An aluminum body car, that's just never an issue. You don't have to worry. You get like a little scrape, and all of a sudden that scrape is going to start rusting. And the other problem, like the major problem in the 3 and the Y, is that it doesn't have an actual dashboard. Everything, all the speedometer and everything, is stuffed into the screen in the center stack, and it's just kind of a hassle. You know, you can't just like check your gauges and keep your eyes on the road. Check your gauges, keep your eyes on the road. You got to like look over to the center, and it just feels unnatural. And you know, we've driven a Y and we've driven a 3 for long enough to know we would never want to get those cars and have to be looking over all the time. The other reason why that's a problem is that the controls that you see here, you know, your little or the readouts that you see there, all that stuff, all that information being stuffed into the screen means the map is going to be a lot smaller than it is. And in the S and the X with the original portrait mode screen, you get this enormous map. It's gigantic. It's like the size of a Rand McNally Atlas. The map it takes up almost the entire screen, and so the vast portion of a 17-inch portrait mode screen is your map, and so you get huge amounts of detail. And you don't in either the Model 3 or the Model Y, because it's a smaller screen to begin with. It's not a 17, it's like a 13 or a 15, and it's in landscape mode, and all this other information that you see here is stuffed into that screen, and so your map is like a tiny little portion of it. Your map is like maybe 6 by 6, so it's like less than a quarter the size of the map in the original Model S and Model X dashboard. And you know, they renewed, or they did a refresh in the Model S and the Model X in mid 2021, and we really don't prefer it because they took that screen, rotated it, so it went from portrait mode to landscape mode, and they made it a lot less useful in terms of the map. And they did a lot of other stuff with the interior. They got rid of the gear shift lever. And so now, instead of like using your gear shift lever like a normal person would, you got to like swipe on the screen, and that seems ridiculous to not be able to like touch your gear shift lever and go from drive to reverse, or reverse to drive, or park to drive. And they claim that the car knows what you want to do, and again, like, just stop. They're obviously doing that so they could cheap out and not have to pay for a one more stock. It's not appreciated. Like, it does not help to take all the buttons, the physical buttons, out of your interior and put them in the touchscreen. It's annoying in the first place, and it becomes a safety issue. Like, again, in the 3 and the Y and the newer Model S and X, apparently you gotta, like, you can't just use the wiper controls on the turn signal there the way a normal human being would expect to. You gotta mess around on the screen to find the interval wipers, and that's just stupid. Apparently the horn is not in the center of the steering wheel anymore. It's just kind of asinine. And so because of that fact, we do not want a Model 3 or a Model Y, or a refresh Model S or Model X. This is the one, as far as we're concerned, that is the best Tesla to get. The 2020, or maybe early 2021 Model S Long Range Plus. And again, because of depreciation, there's been a lot of depreciation on these things in the last 3-4 years. You can get one at an affordable price. If you don't do as much driving as we do, you can get away with a smaller battery. And maybe you don't need the absolute longest range Tesla. But if you do any amount of driving, you appreciate having a real dashboard with like the gauges right in front of you, and not having to look over at the center screen all the time, and having this enormous map. It's just a lot more useful. All right, a couple other notes. In 1 year of owning this thing and 40,000 miles, we have needed maintenance. People like to think an EV is maintenance free, and that's just not true. We have used up a set of tires, and we're about to replace them. These are the OEM tires. And oh, by the way, when you buy a used Tesla, they're going to try to stiff you on the tires and on a couple of other things, a number of other things. You need to inspect the tires very carefully, especially the inside edges of the rear tires if you're buying a Model S or Model X. And the reason why is because the rear suspension, there's an amount of squat to it, and there's a lot of negative camber, meaning the tires are tilted into the vehicle on the left and the right side. And as a result, there's an enormous amount of wear, premature wear, on the inner edge of the rear tires. And so maybe the previous owner didn't rotate them enough, as was the case with the person that owned this car before we did. And those rear tires were completely useless, and in fact they were unsafe to even rotate and put on the front. And so we made Tesla put new tires on it. And so we had a brand new set of OEM tires, and again, you got to rotate them religiously. Some people say they only get 20,000 miles out of a set of tires. No, we've gotten 40,000. And again, you got to rotate them religiously. If you really want to save money, I mean, I suppose you could actually take them off the wheels and flip them so that the inner edges become the outer edges, and then maybe you could get like 60,000 miles on a set of tires, I suppose. 60 or 70, but it's doubtful because the main portion of the tread is going to be so far worn down at that point that you'll need to replace them anyway. So we have had to replace the tires, or we're about to. We've added washer fluid. We have had to take it in when it was under warranty for a new set of front half shafts, because I guess the previous owner used to drag race it a lot, or did something to the point where the inner CV joints on both front half shafts, meaning the what some people call the axles or the axle shafts that go from the differential to your wheel hub, the inner CV joints were shot, and we had this like shuddering and like vibration, not the clicking that you hear when your outer CV joints are dying, but just like a weird kind of shuddering. And it's a known issue, and they replaced them under warranty, and that would have been, the guy said, a $2,500 repair if we'd had to replace them out of warranty. So we had that done, and then after the warranty expired, we had two things done. We had to have the something called the cinch actuator on the rear hatch replaced, and that's the thing after the hatch closes that locks in there and cinches it shut, so there's no chance of it popping open. Had to have that replaced because it died, and on this car with a dead cinch actuator, you can't even open it with the mechanical release, like the emergency release that's back there. Like if your kid accidentally locks themselves in the hatch, the little steel cable, that wouldn't even pop it open. And we also had to have a couple of suspension components replaced. What we have not had to have done is the kind of maintenance you do on a regular car. Haven't had to do brakes, either pads and rotors, because of the fact that with an EV, you're practically never using the brakes. You have what you might consider engine braking. That does 90+% of the braking. It'll bring this car all the way to a stop. And it's super aggressive when you're not using the autopilot and you're just like got your foot on the gas. As soon as you let off the gas, it'll immediately go into engine braking mode, or what they call regen braking mode. And it makes it a lot easier to drive, a lot more pleasant to drive, because you're not constantly going from the gas to the brake, the gas to the brake. You're just doing what they call one pedal driving. And And again, as soon as you let off that gas, it immediately starts slowing it down aggressively and brings it to a complete stop. Almost as if you've like downshifted 2 or 3 gears in a manual. Like you're going into a tight corner and you want to downshift and get the engine braking done before you get on the mechanical brakes. And so that's one reason. But you're not paying for brakes. I mean, could this thing go 100,000 miles on the original pads and rotors? Easily. We had the wheels off of this thing when we were having some suspension work done on it. We needed, like, I forget, like some control arms, upper or lower. I think lower in the front. And the pads had tons of material left on them, and the rotors were still completely smooth. Completely smooth. Zero apparent wear. One thing you will need to get done though is have the calipers lubed. Probably at, you know, depending where you live. If you're in a cold weather climate, you got a lot of slush and snow and salt on the road. Yeah, you wanna get those calipers greased. Probably, I'm gonna say every 50,000 miles, just so they don't freeze up on you. But you're not gonna need brakes. You are gonna need tires, as indicated, as stated, and you eventually other stuff's gonna break too. You know, we've had a couple cases where this mirror didn't want to fold in or out, and so we just left it folded out permanently. You can just change it in the settings so it doesn't fold up when you lock the car and walk away. The exterior door handles on this thing, eventually you will have 1 or 2 of them malfunction and need to replace them. It's a couple $100 at a time, and these are the kind of door handles that are completely flush to the car, and then when you walk up to the car, the door handles pop out, and then you can grab them. It really would have been nice if they had just done them the way Mercedes has been doing them since like the 1970s, and have it be a door handle that you grab and pull open, and not try to be cute and have it retract and extend. Little stuff in the interior is going to break. I guess at some point the center screen is going to break. The center screen died in our previous Tesla, and we had to have it replaced. That's very expensive if it's out of warranty. They say it starts to bubble up around the edges, and so does the screen in your dashboard. We haven't had it happen on this one. Apparently it happened before we bought it, like with the previous owner. If you hit a curb, the wheels and the wheel covers are very expensive to repair. If you hit a pothole hard enough, you're gonna bust a rim, and it's going to cost you an enormous amount of money to replace that rim and that tire, because you're gonna bubble the tire sidewall, and you're probably gonna do damage to the suspension. And we know that because the guy that bought our previous Tesla had it happen to him right after we sold it to him. Hit a massive pothole somewhere in Michigan with our awful roads that we had in Michigan here. If you hit debris on the highway, the car is very, very low to the ground. You may need to replace the front bumper or the front spoiler, and that's going to be kind of expensive because Tesla doesn't give parts or won't sell parts to like the aftermarket or the independent shops, and so you're going to have all that work done at a Tesla shop, unless you have a really good mechanic, as we did, and he was able to piece the stuff together, all the different mounting tabs and stuff like that, and he got our bumper remounted for us. Other things that can break. Eventually, your drive units, meaning the actual motors, or what you might think of as like a transaxle, like they used to have in a 928 Porsche, eventually one or both of your motors might die. It happened to us in our previous Tesla. It's still under warranty. And we got the message, and it only happened like while we were supercharging in hot weather, and it said like front motor disabled, temporary reduction in power, and it was actually a pretty substantial reduction in power. And after a little while, that message went away, and both motors worked again. But we took it in, they replaced it, and that's about a $10,000 repair front or rear, to give you a new motor. Which you could think of, again, as the equivalent of like a new engine or a new transmission. About the size of a watermelon, maybe a little bit bigger, and that's what actually drives the car. And in most Teslas, you got a front and rear motor. And so those might go out on you, even though they have no moving parts. You might have like a coolant issue, you might have like an oil leak or something, you know, even though, again, there's no, it's not no moving parts, it's no like reciprocating parts. And nothing lasts forever. And so eventually, even in a Tesla, even in an electric car, you're gonna need stuff like that repaired. And then the big deal is your battery. Eventually your battery's gonna die on you, and it's not clear if it's gonna happen at 80 or 100,000 miles. It's not clear if it's gonna happen at 250,000 miles. Not clear if it's gonna happen at 500,000 miles. I guess some cars out there, some Teslas, are still on the original battery at 250,000 miles, but it's doubtful. They have a 150,000 mile warranty, or I think 8 years. And it would be a very intelligent decision to trade in that car the day before the warranty expires. Because paying for a new battery, yes, it can be, you know, depending on the model, $25,000, $30,000. And it's still probably less expensive than the accumulated maintenance you would have had to do, like in your Duramax LML diesel. If your CP4 high pressure fuel pump dies on you and you have to replace your entire fuel system, that's like a $10,000, $15,000 repair. So it's not as if like it's going to kill you, but you would be well served if you probably got rid of that car right before the warranty expired, or just expected that at some point after the warranty expires you're gonna need to pay for a new battery and not be surprised when it happens. We'd rather not have to do that. I think if it degrades something like 30%, I can't remember the exact amount. If it degrades a certain amount, Tesla will replace it for free while it's still under warranty. And you can check how much it's degraded. There's like certain apps. There's one called like Tessie, and it'll tell you. Like the car itself isn't going to tell you. It doesn't have a monitor for that kind of thing, but the app does. The third-party app does. And so that's something to think about. And we're kind of on the fence about owning the car that long. Or just replacing it with something that has much lower mileage and not having to worry about it. It's an open question. These cars can be expensive to repair when they're out of warranty, even if it's just a door handle, even if it's like minor body work, even if, you know, like a screen or something. Stuff on this car can be expensive to repair, and you got to consider that fact. Maybe you're just going to own it for the 4 years or 50,000 miles that it has the basic bumper-to-bumper warranty, and then trade it in. Okay, that's fine too. You're not going to get your return on investment that you would if you kept it for longer. But, you know, make your own decision and keep that in mind. Just saying, for this car, after 40,000 miles in a year, it's needed just a few repairs, not a lot. And we're not super concerned about it. We're not concerned about the fact that it's out of warranty right now, because the major things that are going to cost you an arm and a leg, which is the drive units and the battery, are still under warranty until 8 years or 150,000 miles. And the way we drive, that's going to mean, you know, maybe we'll do another 40,000 miles in the next year, get it to 120, and then maybe the next year we'll get it to 150. And so it'll be a 6-year-old Tesla at that point. After 3 years with us. And maybe we'll trade it in then. You know, it's hard to say. But the problem is there's nothing more compelling at this point that we would want to trade up to, because there is no other car that has really more range than this 2020, which is 4 years old at this point, that has 402 miles of EPA range. You know, Tesla was really improving it for a long time, and then they got to 400 miles and they kind of stopped, and they kind of leveled off, and they haven't invested a lot of R&D in the Model S and Model X in quite a while now. And a lot of people would say there's no reason for them to still be making the Model S and Model X at this point, because there's such a tiny portion of total sales and total profits for the company. They might stop making it in the near future. Who's to say? But until the Model Y or the Model 3 have 400 miles of EPA range, we would not consider one. And again, the fact that the 3 and the Y have a steel body and don't have a real dashboard, that rules out those cars regardless of range, in our opinion. Okay, a couple other things in terms of living with it. The full self-driving, it's great, but you still, like I said, you got to keep your hand on the wheel at all times, and you got to keep your eyes on the road. It's not perfect, but it's very close to perfect. And you're going to go hours. I mean, I think we've had it engaged now for like the majority of this video, probably 45 minutes, have not had to intervene, have not had to disengage it in that entire time. One thing I'll say though, when you first engage it and disengage it, check this out. Okay, it's disengaged now, and you see a bunch of information there. You see your speedometer, you see your the exterior temperature, you see the clock, the energy meter on the right, and your navigation meter on the left. And you could change these little secondary information screens. You know, maybe you want to see your like trip odometer, your trip MPGs or whatever. It shows you the speed limit. Watch what happens when you engage FSD. Most of that information goes away. You disengage, it comes back. You re-engage, and it goes away. And that's kind of annoying, because that means you got to set your little secondary screens back up each time you engage and disengage FSD. And there's some information you can never get back. You know, so you get your little secondary screens back, but you don't get the thermometer back, and you don't get the speed limit sign back. And you think the speed limit sign would kind of be important? It's going to adjust your speed based on what it thinks the speed limit is anyway. Sometimes it gets thrown off. We were on US 15, like around the Gettysburg area, and the car kept thinking that it was a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit, because it saw the 15 signs by the side of the road, and it was not 15-mile-an-hour limit, it was US 15. But it was like a black and white sign, and I guess the car thought it was a speed limit sign, and it kept trying to slow down, and it was pretty damn annoying. Other than that, it's gonna pick the speed that it thinks makes sense, and generally that's the speed limit, and you can override it up to a point. It's gonna try to say 75, given that the speed limit is 75 here. You can set it at 80, you can set it at 85. You cannot set it faster than 85, and if you take it up above about 89, if you hit 90 miles an hour, it's going to disengage completely and put you in the penalty box. And not re-engage again until you pull over and stop and put it in park, and then you can re-engage autopilot. But literally, it's just been minor quibbles over the entire year we've owned it. No other car, we haven't taken any other car this far in this little time. 40,000 miles in just over a year. And it's just about perfect, like I said. In an absolutely perfect world, it would have a couple of things it doesn't have. It would have 120 outlets, or 240 outlets, so you could actually maybe run your house off of your car in the event of a storm, like you can with the Power Boost F-150, like you can with the Lightning F-150 with Pro Power on board. There's no reason why you should not be able to run your house off of your car during a blackout. Like people in Houston who were without power for like 3 weeks this month when Hurricane Beryl came through. Tesla would sell a ton more cars if they added that one feature. And they could name their price for that feature. But they don't want to. And they've got a strategy. because they want you to buy a Powerwall, but it's stupid. And they're worried about battery life and having to replace batteries under warranty, and that's also pretty asinine as well. A lot of cars, like the Hyundais, are starting to offer the ability to run a 120 or a 240 outlet off of your car, off of this enormous battery that you're dragging around with you. And there's no reason why Tesla shouldn't as well. Also, as stated, it would be nice if the dashboard wasn't so useless in terms of making you reset, set it back up every time you engage autopilot. Also, it would be nice if you could close your windows remotely, because every now and then we'll park the car, go inside, and then we'll get the little warning that one of the windows is cracked open, and it doesn't let you close it. Newer Teslas let you stream the video from your cameras when it's in Sentry mode, and that's very nice, so you can see if anybody's messing with your car. This one was made before 21, and so it does not let you do that, unfortunately. It would be nice if the interior had a little more usable space. It would have been neat, given how little useful storage there is in the console there, if they had offered a 6-seater version with 3 across seating in the front. And then maybe let you order the jump seats still in the way back, so you could have 2 people in the way back for a total of 8 people in your Model S. That would have been fantastic. But even so, like I said, it's a 5-seater version, and it's got all the room you're going to need for 5 people. It allows you in camp mode, if you get where you're going and, I don't know, you need to rack out for a couple hours, you can put the back seats down, stretch out in the back, and roll out a sleeping bag or what have you, and get some actual rest without having to try to sleep in the seats, like the front seat with the seat leaned back. The camp mode is amazing. And there isn't a lot more that we would want from this thing. The ability to operate your 12-volt outlets even when the car is switched off. I don't think it has that. It doesn't have a lot that we want and can't get. It's just about perfect. And so I don't want to keep this review going endlessly. I guess I'd say the last thing, that rear suspension. Knowing that the negative camber is so steep, it would be nice if, like, when you're cruising on the highway, if it would automatically raise up the rear suspension and make the wheels a little more vertical, so that you don't get so much premature wear on your tires. Other than that, there's really nothing else we could ask for. And this is as close to perfect a car as we have ever owned. And at 1 year and 40,000 miles, there's virtually nothing that we would change on it. It's the perfect road trip car, and the perfect car to live with day in and day out. All right, well, thanks everyone. Have a great day, and we will talk to you later.